Okay, guys, so welcome back to part 2 of the e-Spurs Christmas special. On this edition, we're going to be looking ahead to the January window, which is looming. We've got questions for Lyle Thomas, and we've got questions for the guys, Jason and Ian, and finally, we'll be looking ahead to Southampton on the 28th. So, the January window is upon us. Daniel Levy's favourite time of the year, bar the summer. We're going to come to you first, Lyle. Only right to start with you, I believe, on this. Wasn't too long ago the club obviously released the news that Paul Mitchell was serving his notice, or should I say Pochettino actually said it in his press conference that he was serving his notice. Do you feel that upheaval in terms of him serving his notice is going to affect the club in terms of a recruitment perspective?
I think in the short term, no, because he's serving a notice until the end of next year, so he's still down to do 2 more transfer windows. So certainly in terms of the next window, the January window and the summer, he will still be heavily involved. And normally in these situations when there's a real falling out and the club don't want the individual to be around, they'll go on gardening leave or they'll play a very diminished role. And I know for a fact that Paul Mitchell's not doing that. He's actually as heavily involved and has all the same responsibilities still that he did before he announced he was going to resign. And so, I don't think it will be felt that much over the next 6 months or so. But after that is going to be the difficulty for Spurs, is going to be finding somebody that has the link with Mauricio that Paul Mitchell does, because I think I said it before, they're like twins really. They really think alike. Paul knows what Mauricio wants in players now. They've worked together long enough. And it's a really good working relationship they have, and it's going to be a really big loss, not just for Mauricio in terms of the way that the transfer committee works, but also in terms of recruitment and what kind of players are brought to the table for Mauricio to look at and maybe go and watch himself before they decide who to go for. So Spurs have got a test on their hands. I mean, they could still, on the one hand, persuade Paul Mitchell to stay. I mean, I don't want to get anybody's hopes up and say that's going to happen, but never say never. But they also are actively looking for his replacement and bringing in another head of recruitment. And so they'll be down to them to see who they can find and who Mauricio can find that he knows and trusts and can develop a good relationship with. I mean, it's very much the model, isn't it? Nowadays, the manager and the sporting director, but there are not that many examples out there, I don't think, of a manager and sporting director that work so well together. But when you do get that, then there are a lot of benefits to get from that. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens on that front, and certainly a good test for Spurs and a good test for their current staff of whether they can identify the right person or indeed convince Paul Mitchell to stay.
We're going to come on to targets shortly, but what you've just said there, Lyle, just in regards to how close that relationship is between Mauricio and Paul Mitchell, is that a concern for Spurs fans? Should we be concerned because of how close they are in terms of, does that make Mauricio question his maybe long-term future with the club because of the loss of Mitchell, potentially? You say there might be a chance of turning it around, which is maybe, like you say, you never say never. Do you think that's a big blow to Mauricio long-term?
Oh, it's definitely a blow, yeah, definitely a blow. I mean, it shouldn't be understated how close they are in terms of, on a personal level, they're good friends, I know, and they're also have a fantastic working relationship together. I mean, they've been working together for a number of years now. And as I said, Paul knows what Mauricio wants in a player, not just technically, but also physically and mentally, and he does the rigorous legwork that Mauricio requires a person in that position to do. So it's certainly a blow. Whether that's going to have a knock-on effect to Mauricio's own position at the club, I mean, I wouldn't want to say. I wouldn't want to make any judgments on that particular front. I mean, again, it's going to be down to what happens over the next year or so and who they bring in. I mean, if you get to a couple of years down the line and it's not working out with whoever's there, well, it might not be the end of the world for Mauricio. They might just be able to move that person on and bring in someone else. I mean, there are a number of people around that do work on the recruitment side of things. There's still David Webb, who's head of player ID. So he's a very knowledgeable guy and an experienced guy who did really well at Bournemouth and played a hand in Bournemouth's rise up the league. So there are enough good guys around. You've obviously got Rebecca Capelhorn in there, who is head of football operations, I think her title is, but she's kind of the de facto sporting director in terms of the numbers. So she very much decides on the numbers of the deals and the wages and does a lot of negotiating on Levy's behalf. So there are plenty of people around, plenty of expertise there, even without Mitchell. But it's all going to be about what players are identified for Mauricio over the next 2 to 3 transfer windows. If they get a load of duds in and it affects the team, then it will be more pressuring for Mauricio and more difficult for the club. But if they do well with recruitment and the players they brought in already do good and the players they bring in further down the line do good, then there's no reason why Mauricio would be thinking about his future if he's got a good team on his hands.
No, it's good to hear, and a real fascinating insight there. Coming to you, Jace, I think a lot has been made about Spurs' start to the season, about potential signings coming up in the January window. We're going to come to you, obviously. We're going to come to Lyle at the end as well to get his verdict on what he thinks may be the case for January. But coming to you first, we're looking at the squad at the moment. I think all Spurs fans, we all seem to be of the same kind of feeling that just a couple of tweaks here and there and we can be really up challenging again, not just for the top 4, but maybe even for this league. Chelsea are on a great run, but no one really, apart from Chelsea, are kind of, even challenging them at the moment. We're seeing City, Arsenal, Manchester United all looking a little bit, wobbly. What do you make of it? Would you like to see Spurs go and invest and buy a couple of players in? Do you think that's realistic?
Well, I think, like I said, I think we're in an incredibly difficult stage of our development as a club where the right player as such that will come in and make that immediate impact and be better than what we've got. You're not talking about a £10 million player anymore. I mean, you're talking about a better goalkeeper than Lloris, a better striker than Kane, a better midfield player than Dele Alli. If you're going to really improve the squad, I think I said with Ian in the summer, you look at the players in your squad, and what we don't want is another squad rotation backup player, is it? Because then you're not really changing the dynamics of the squad. So I think that real out-and-out talented player, I think we probably all crave what we call a number 10. Other people would crave a winger. Other people would crave another striker or something. But for me, it would be craving a number 10. But which number 10 is going to be available in January that you'd really put your houses on to totally come in and make that immediate impact? And for me, I think, do you want to go and spend 40 million quid on January? Or let's leave it until the summer till we get the number 10 that we really, really want, providing we do make that big effort for, be it a number 10, be it a winger, be it a striker in the summer. I don't see the point in just jumping for the sake of jumping in January unless it's going to make a massive, massive difference.
Yeah, no, I echo those thoughts. And I think the situation we've got is in January, as we know, the January players that Spurs may target just simply normally aren't available. It's a very, very difficult market in January to kind of negotiate, which we've seen in the past with Spurs. Coming to you, Ian, I know we've discussed this subject quite a few times now in the build-up to the window. I've also mentioned on the pod that it'd be nice to see Spurs show that little bit of ambition with the January window coming up, but what do you make of it? Do you feel there is a need, when you look at that bench, is there a need to improve the squad as we go into the kind of the crunch time now after Christmas, when we are going to have the reintroduction of the Europa League come February? We've got the FA Cup coming, which again we want to see Spurs take seriously. What do you think? Would you like to see Spurs make a little tweak or two?
I think we should always be looking for our club to improve its starting 11 and its overall squad. But like Jason said, who is there? To come in January that's going to hit the ground running. Now, I think you've hit the nail on the head before, Rick, when it comes to what you've said on previous pods. The fact that we haven't had all of our what we class as our first 11 on the pitch at any one time. Now, I think if we can get Toby back fully fit and we can get Eric Lamela back, and then we've got our first choice 11 out on the pitch as us fans would go, then let's see how we get on there. But I don't know who we could bring in January that would upgrade our squad in time for us to mount a charge on what we hope is either a top 4 or something better for the remainder of the season. So I'm not sure we would invest in anybody, unless Mauricio's got grand plan and with Paul Mitchell to bring somebody in that is going to take us to the next level. So, much as I'd like to see our squad improve, I can't see it happening unless, but I'm more than happy to be proved wrong come the end of January.
Yeah, I'm coming to you now, Lau, on this subject. Now, many fans, I think in general, are a little bit concerned naturally because of the Mitchell being on notice. Does that mean that Spurs may not do much business? Does that mean he may not show an interest? I mean, you seem to be of the case that you think he will still very much be actively involved. What do you think in terms of Spurs looking at this window coming up from an outside perspective? Do you think there's a need for Spurs to invest in key areas to give the likes of Eriksen a bit more competition, and the likes of Harry Kane maybe? We've seen Vincent Janssen not have the greatest starts. Is there an argument in certain areas that it could be strengthened?
I don't expect Spurs to be busy at all in January. I mean, I'd be surprised if they signed anybody. I mean, maybe one at the most. Certainly, the information that I'm getting is it's not going to be busy. It's going to be as quiet as it has been over the last 2 Januaries. I mean, the last January they only signed Shiloh Tracy, the youngster from Ebbsfleet, and the season before that they only signed Dele Alli, and they were both the January windows when Mitchell was involved. So, he's still going to be very involved, but I think it's still going to be a case of planning for the summer. I mean, what I know is that the only real problems that Spurs have got is making sure that players who are not playing enough are happy, and so you might see a little bit of pressure from agents on players who are not playing as regularly as they might want to, on whether they can get out on loan or not. But I don't think they will do. I mean, again, you look at the Spurs squad, and I agree with what you said before about what they need to strengthen. Well, you look at it, and do you think, what position is there really? I mean, yeah, maybe a number 10. They were in the market for a creative number 10 in the summer. They couldn't get the ones they wanted. They were looking at Isco, but the deal couldn't be done. I certainly don't think the deal can be done in January either. I mean, the only reason, the main reason that the deal couldn't be done was because Real Madrid are obviously under a transfer embargo, and they are not in a position to be letting out any of their players at the moment. And so, they're not going to weaken their own squad, whether they're playing Isco or not, or whether they're playing James Rodriguez or not, unless it's going to be a massive amount of money coming in. And certainly, if they let James Rodriguez go, that seems to be the one they're willing to do because of the money they can get for it, then I think that makes it even more unlikely that they would let Isco go. I know the other name that's been mentioned is Ross Barkley. I know Spurs obviously are going to be one of a number of clubs who would be interested in Ross Barkley if he was available. So it's definitely a no-brainer and no surprise that they'll be keeping an eye on what happens with him and new contract talks with Everton. Obviously, there's 18 months to go on the contract. So if he doesn't agree a new deal between now and the end of the season, you get to next summer and you've got somebody like Barkley who's still young, still got lots of potential, just the kind of player that Pochettino might like to develop, and only has 12 months left on his contract. That could be a deal that they might look to do then, but certainly not in January. So in terms of, again, fans might not like to hear it. It's going to be a quiet one. And like you said, there's not really many positions you can look at that Spurs need to do any business in. They've signed 4 new first-team players in the summer. None of those 4 first-team players, apart from Victor Wanyama, have hit the ground running. There's still so much more to come from them. There's still lots of development there to be done. And there's other players in other positions who can get better. I mean, you look at centre-half and you look at Kevin Wimmer, who's still young and has done well when he's come in. There's there's lots of potential there and big future for him there. Carter Vickers is obviously the other one, the other young right-footed central defender who's not getting a lot of game time. But again, I don't think he's in a position where he would expect to be playing more than he is at the moment. What with Eric Dyer being able to play there as well. You look at left back, you look at Ben Davis. I mean, I know he's changed agents within the last 6 months. So you might, a new agent wouldn't be doing his job if he wasn't pushing the club on the behalf of his player to get more game time for his new client. So there might be a bit of pressure there. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Ben Davis' name mentioned in the press with other clubs and being loaned away. But I certainly don't think Spurs would be prepared to loan Ben Davis out unless they were to get a replacement in. I know they have been looking at left backs. That has been one option, that they might think about. So, if they did get a very good offer for Ben Davis and they could get a replacement for him, that might be something they'd look at. But again, I don't think that's necessarily that likely to happen in January. what with it being mid-season and everything, and these kind of things can go the wrong way. I mean, I know Spurs have an interest in Sessegnon, the young left-back at Fulham. But again, he's such a young lad, even if you were to bring someone like Sessegnon in, who's only 17, only just started playing first-team games at Fulham, and Fulham are asking for crazy money at like 8 or 9 million for him. I don't think that's going to be a deal that they would be prepared to do for a 16, 17-year-old. So yeah, again, I'm looking around the team and thinking, what positions? Can't see any.
The thing is, Lowell, as well, I think, again, this seems to be something that's mentioned, I think Spurs fans in general, there has to be an understanding, which I think you all sit on the side of the fence, that Daniel Levy is saving for this stadium. There does seem to be this kind of criticism at the past levelled at him, that at critical times in Spurs, there hasn't been that investment. And we'll look at the Champions League, for example, and like you've rightly mentioned, the only player that really has hit the ground running has been Victor Wanyama. Do you think Spurs sometimes are the victims of their own downfall, just in terms of that sometimes at critical times during Levy's reign, they haven't necessarily pushed on? Or, are you of the opinion that Daniel Levy is a businessman and therefore every decision he takes is in the best interest of the football club? What do you make of Levy's reign as a whole in terms of the transfer structure?
Yeah, I mean, I know it's frustrating for fans, and obviously he's frustrated the technical staff on not wanting to sanction the kind of money that's been asked for certain players in the summer and things like that. But yeah, again, from his point of view, he's going to be looking at. I know they have found it difficult to find the money for this stadium, and it is fundamental to the long-term growth of a club that they build it, and that it's there, and that they can increase the revenue. And it shouldn't be understated how much they can increase the revenue by increasing the capacity and having that new stadium there, and all the exclusive, sponsorship deals that come with it, and all the the special fan tickets. I mean, I'm sure you've all seen this special what do you call it, bar and seat positions next to the tunnel and all that kind of stuff. All that is going to generate massive amounts of revenue for the club, and it's going to put them in a much stronger position in the transfer market. I mean, you cannot forget that financial fair play comes into things now, and clubs have to break even. They can't just pump lots of money in. No club can do that anymore. They have to make recoup funds in other ways to make sure that the books are balanced. And Tottenham haven't been able to sell other players for massive amounts of money. Only Gareth Bale, they've been able to do that. And they reinvested all that money immediately, and it didn't go very well. So, they've had to learn from that, really. And again, fans might not like to hear it, and they might disagree with me on this. I'm sure they will. But chucking money at it and chucking new players at it, when things aren't going well, or when things aren't going as well as people want them to, is not necessarily always the answer. And Pochettino is not the kind of manager that can just take any old group of players, put them together into a cohesive team and make them into a winning team. He's somebody who needs to develop players over time into playing the way that he wants his team to play. There are different roles in his system, and it's not necessarily about the individual player that plays in that role. Whichever player plays in that role has to fulfill that role. So if Eric Dyer is playing at right centre back, he has to fulfill that right centre back role and what Pochettino wants out of it. So that's really what it's about, and I don't think chucking players at it and chucking new players at it would be the answer for Spurs improving. I think Spurs are slowly improving, and the players that they brought in the summer have still got a lot of potential and futures ahead of them. I mean, they're so young. I mean, you look at even Wanyama's only 24 years old. Can you believe it? And he's been playing around. Seems to be around for so long and has got so many appearances, and even playing in the Champions League for Celtic at a young age. But he's only 24. And Jansen's only 21 or whatever he is, 22. Even Kudu's still very young as well. He's only 21, is he? There's still much more to come from these players, and they're only going to get better under Pochettino because that's what he's good at. He's good at developing players and improving them. Yeah,
and he does seem to be, Lyle, very much Daniel Levy's kind of man, very much a coach rather than, dare I say, of course he's a manager as well, but he is very much there to, coach the players, make them better. We see the likes of Danny Rose and Kyle Walker, how they've grown under this manager. Not only now two of the best fullbacks in the Premier League, you could argue now two of the very best in Europe. And I've got no doubt if Spurs, like I say, if there was an auction for these guys, they'd be double, treble than obviously what Spurs originally bought them for. But I think what the guys would want to know out there listening to the pod is just a bit of a brief on Mitchell leaving the club. Are you able to shed any light as to what potential deals may have fallen through as to give him his indication that this club wasn't the right challenge for him any longer?
Well, the way I understand it is that there was some conflict over certain players last summer, Michy Batshuayi being one of them, and what the club were prepared to pay for him. It's obviously Mitchell's job to, recruit the best players that he can and make the manager happy and bring players into a winning team. And what Spurs set out to do last summer was to improve the first team squad and improve competition in all positions. And they've very much shown that they will prioritise certain positions of weakness early in the window. So the first full window that Pochettino had, I think it was after his first season, they obviously identified that the defence, and specifically the right side of the defence, was the weakness. So they went out and bought Toby Alderweireld, and they went out and bought Kieran Trippier, and they did it as quick as they could. So the idea is to address any problems or weaknesses in the squad early, and then look on how they can improve or what they can do further down the line. So that's obviously what they did in the summer. They wanted to go out and buy a striker, somebody that could learn from Kane and was prepared to, play second fiddle to Kane when Kane's fit, because obviously Kane's always going to play when he's fit and firing. But also somebody that could compete with Kane a little bit as well and push Kane. And Michy Batshuayi was the one that they identified who could do that. And but unfortunately, again, this is down to the wider context really of the transfer market and the way that European clubs are treating English clubs these days, and they're them whacking 10, 15 million on top of what they were asking for, 2 or 3 months earlier in terms of the window in the summer. Levy wasn't prepared to pay the money for Batshuayi. So they obviously opted to go for Janssen, and I think that happened with one or two others. So I think, obviously I can't speak for Mitchell and I wouldn't want to put words in his mouth, but the way I would interpret it is that it got to a point where he felt that he couldn't do that to the best of his ability anymore, that he couldn't bring in the players that they felt would improve the squad, and he decided to offer his resignation. But then again, we've seen Levy pay the money for Sissoko since then. So as I said before, I'd never say never in terms of maybe persuading him to stay. You never know what could happen between now and then, but certainly no indication yet that he could reconsider.
Coming on to the questions from the listeners, guys, I'm going to bring Jace and Ian back in here. Jace, I'm going to come to Ian first on this. Ian, I know we've discussed about transfer targets. I have got a question from Josh Fitter. I know you've touched upon it tonight as well. At Josh Fitter 95 asks, who do you think Spurs should sign to improve the squad? Any specific targets? Do you have anyone in mind that you would, in an ideal world, you'd like to bring in January if X player was available?
I could make this a flippant answer, and I could say, if money was no object, there's a certain Argentinian in playing for Barcelona at the minute. But I'm going to try and be realistic, and I'm struggling. I am really struggling to know who's available. We've heard Barkley be mentioned recently. We've heard Zaha, been mentioned both tonight and in previous social media posts. Now, I think Zaha's probably more of a Pochettino player than perhaps Barkley is, and by all accounts, Barkley didn't exactly cover himself in glory tonight in the Merseyside derby, unless things have changed in the last 8 minutes. But in all sense of reality, it has to be someone, as Poch has said before, that will improve the squad. If we got Zaha in, do we actually play to his strengths? And I'm not sure we do. I think that Zaha strikes me as a wide player, whereas haven't we gone away from having wingers? I'm not sure we play with them anymore. We play with a different type of formation now that has players like the Sons and the Alis and the Sissokos that are jacks of all trade, and we hope masters of them all. But I can't see us getting anybody in the window, as Lyle said, and I don't know who is out there that would improve us without us spending silly money. So sorry, Josh, I'm struggling with a question, mate.
Coming to you, Jace. There's been a few rumours. I think Lyle hopefully may clear these up for us. Memphis Depay, Wilf Zaha, obviously we've mentioned his name already. Ross Barkley. Any of those guys there, would they take your fancy in an ideal world if they were available and the clubs were looking to sell? Would any of those players be an interest to you in the current squad that we would need to invest in?
I think I said last week, I like Barkley as a player for some of the games that he plays, but the problems with Barkley are problems that we already have in a squad. A talented player that can disappear from games when you really need him to stand up. It's really difficult, isn't it? I mean, the players that I'd like from the Premier League aren't particularly players that we need to bring in position. I mean, I like Virgil van Dijk, for instance, but I can't see us making a move for Virgil van Dijk, and it's not necessarily a position that we're looking to strengthen at the moment. Zaha, I just also look as well that we tend to look very insular at transfers, but Crystal Palace have spent massive money on Christian Benteke. They sold Balassi, so they're not going to sell Wilfried Zaha. Are certainly not going to sell him at mid-season, and they're certainly not going to sell him at half the price they sold Balassi for. So you've got to look at it. Which players could you really make available? And I think maybe if you went to Liverpool for a Sturridge, not that it would be my choice, but maybe if you went with silly money, that you'd get a player. But I really can't see. I just can't see one coming in. Fabregas, as I said, at Chelsea, obviously isn't exactly in favour. But as I said last week, if we try to sign Cesc Fabregas, regardless of whether he'd say yes or no, the entire support will be up in arms. But he is a creative type passer that can play in the Premier League that in theory we, would benefit us. But as I say, I don't think there's a single supporter out there that will want us to sign Cesc Fabregas. So you've also got that problem as well, isn't there?
Well, you say it, Jace. We had William Gallas who played for Arsenal and Chelsea, but I get your drift. I do understand what you mean. Coming to you, Lyle, a couple of questions for you here. One here I've got is from Nick Teff at NHT82, and he asks, any truth in the link with Frank Kessie? Player linked recently with the club, seems to be in numerous papers at the moment. You heard anything at all on that particular player?
No, nothing that would get anybody excited. I mean, Kessie's, 19, kind of a midfield enforcer, isn't he? But scores some goals from midfield, so I think he's a number 8 kind of player. Again, I think it would be too soon for Kessie, and I don't think it's a position that Spurs are looking to strengthen, really. Players who are of that age, who come in and start scoring goals immediately in one of the top 5 leagues, are always going to be banded around. And I know that, again, when you see players like this mentioned, it can be very much down to who their agents are and what their agents' connections are like, and whether they can get on the phone to journalists and start drumming up some interest in their player. But listen, Spurs have looked at Kessie. Pretty much every Premier League club has looked at Kessie at one point or another, especially this season, because they have to do that. When the player's playing well, and when they're so young and playing well, then there wouldn't be, it's due diligence, isn't it, to watch a player like that. But I don't think it's something that Spurs will look to do. I think if Kessie was to move, it would be to another Serie A club, I would have thought, in the short term. I mean, there's a what's the word? I don't want to say arrogance, but there's a kind of an arrogance in British clubs in that when they see a player like Kessie doing well, who's at 19, who's only just started doing well and scoring goals from midfield for the last 2-3 months since the start of the season, they're quite prepared to let him move to another club for 5, 6, 7 million in Serie A and watch him do well for another year or whatever, and then go in and pay 15 million or 20 million for him. I think Premier League clubs are prepared to do that to make sure that they're not taking a massive risk. I mean, it'd be a massive risk, to take someone like Kessie. I mean, especially given the league he's playing in. He's playing in Serie A. It's a much slower league. Midfielders have a tendency to score more goals, and I think it would be too soon to throw him in to Spurs, and certainly in the Premier League. But as is the way of things, when players are mentioned, and the more they're mentioned, and the more interest is drummed up, and the more articles are there about them, all of a sudden everybody wants them, don't they?
They do indeed, and I hope, Nick, that has answered your question there. Obviously what Lara's done there for you, I hope that's answered it in full. Lara, staying with you, I think you've pretty much nailed this question already. So we've got Nico McCall at Nico McCall, who's asking, what are the chances of a marquee signing in January? From what you seem to have said already, I think it's pretty much a case of don't get your hopes up.
Yeah, slim to none is what I would say.
a lot has been mentioned about Wilfried Zaha, a player that Spurs were linked to in the summer. It just seems to be the case that we were linked to him just as the Nkudu deal seemed to be in the balance. But from what you seem to be understanding, it would have been a separate move to him if Spurs would have shown a bit more desire in the player. Is that how you would understand it? It would have been a separate move to Nkudu? You don't think that would have had a bearing on it if that deal was done?
No, not at all. No. Nkudu plays off the left for a start, and Zaha plays off the right predominantly. So they're two different positions, and they wanted, direct, pacey players, skillful players off both sides. And, wanted more attacking threats from the left and the right, and the option to play some, a bit more width if they could. And that was why they signed Nkudu. Nkudu was always being done, and I actually thoroughly enjoyed reporting on Nkudu's transfer, because rather than it just being a straightforward, deal agreed, medical done, personal terms done, he signs for the club, the straightforward transfer story from start to finish, it was a lot more interesting than that, and some real interesting, nuances to what was going on, the changes at Marseille and in the personnel there, and obviously how pivotal the deal for Ng going in the other way, how important that was to it as well at the same time. So it really was quite a good thing for me to get my teeth stuck into. I really enjoyed it, and obviously when we leaked the photograph of him in the changing room, that was good. But no, it certainly didn't have a bearing on Zaha. Zaha was the player that they wouldn't have signed Sissoko had they signed Zaha. That was the right they wanted. And when they didn't get Zaha, they had to look at who they could get, and it was a case of Sissoko or nobody, and they went for Sissoko.
Do you think there's a chance, bearing in mind the form, Lyle, of how Zaha has been this season, he's been phenomenal for Palace, is that an area that we would revisit? Jason's of the opinion they wouldn't sell Balassi and Zaha, but do you think for enough money at it, Palace may consider selling?
I wouldn't have thought in January, no. Palace are in a relegation fight. They're not going to sell their best players in January. It would be an absolute catastrophe if they did that. And so, in the summer, again, it would depend completely on how the rest of Sissoko's season would go. If he really wasn't to get any better than this and slip off again and not get anywhere near the team for the rest of the season, then, I think that's something that they would look at again, but I don't think it's something they're thinking about now. I think they will be pouring their energy into making Sissoko the player that they hope he will be and hope he was when they signed him.
Fingers crossed. Well, I think that pretty much has covered the January window itself. Jace, Ian, do you want to add anything further at all? Ask Lyle anything on?
The other question I'd ask on a January window would be, Lyle, how close to a football manager transfer is a real transfer? Because I think there's a few football manager players that actually think that's exactly how it works, and it's you press a button and 5 minutes later the whole deal's done, and if it's not done, you can just kind of reload the game and you don't have to worry about what went wrong in the first place.
Yeah, well, listen, I play Football Manager a lot myself, and I can tell you it's nothing like that in real life. No, not at all.
You stunned me.
It's a people business, isn't it? It's about the people you know and the relationships you have with them, and persuading people to do deals. Because you can start a negotiation, or you can approach a club about signing a player, and the immediate response is a no. But it's about powers of persuasion and powers of cutting the right deal, and some people are better deal makers than others, and some people are better negotiators and better persuaders, and some people are able to influence others in different ways better than other people. So it's down to who you've got at your club and who you've got strong relationships with. Who can make these connections for you. You need as many people out there as possible working on your behalf and working in your interests, because like I said, it's down to the people and who they're willing to sit around the table with, and who they're willing to pick up the phone to. There's a lot of people that might be at a club and might call an agent, they don't answer their calls because there's beef there from previous windows, and others might pick up the phone straight away, and it's a lot of subtlety and a lot of nuance to it, and it's interesting business, and that's one of the reasons why I tend to do more stuff on transfers than anything else, because not only is it what people want to read the most, but it's also some of the most interesting stuff that goes on behind the scenes in player recruitment. It's a really interesting business, and it's getting more interesting, I think, as the years go by.
Yeah, it's funny what you said there, Lar, about not too much beef at other clubs. I'm sure Daniel Levy has never offended another chairman, has he? Has he ever offended another chairman? Just a few.
So I guess what you're saying is, Lyle, is that an old colleague of yours, Gary Cotterill, it's probably best he not stand outside the training ground on on transfer deadline day in January. Otherwise, he's going to get incredibly bored and incredibly cold.
Possibly. I mean, it's been Paul Gilmore, I think, who's been my colleague Paul Gilmore, who's been at Spurs in the last few windows, and
Right.
he was fine in September because it was a bit warm, but we'll see. He's free on February the 1st, and we'll see what happens. It might be a waste of time. It might not be. You never know. I mean, look what happened with Sissoko in the end.
Exactly.
Yeah. We'll be holding you down, Lyle, if Messi turns up. However, I very highly doubt it. You never know. He might want to come and play down White Lane for the final season. Who knows?
Who knows?
Okay, guys. So we're going to go for a quick break, and then after that, we're going to come back and preview, should I say, the Southampton game, which is to come on the 28th of December. Okay, so previewing Southampton to come, which is on the 28th of December. Coming to you first, Jace. Big game for Spurs, really, Southampton away. A game where pretty much it would seal off a really, really good Christmas period for Spurs, wouldn't it? 9 points out of a possible 9. What's your thoughts on the game? Is it going to be a bit of a tough match up there? What are you expecting?
Well, I think it will be a tough game because looking at Southampton's record at home this season, they've only lost once at home. And there hasn't exactly, I think there's only been 15 goals scored all season at Mary's. So, I can see it being a really tight game, but we've got to get back on that. As good as our home form's been, we've got to get back to winning away from home. I think we've only won a couple of times away ourselves recently. So it's important that we go there, put on a performance. As I said, without Charlie Austin, some of their goal threat's gone. But it's certainly a game that if we're going to stay in touch, and with Chelsea on the horizon as well, that we definitely want to be getting certainly 4 points, if not all 6 of the next 2 away games.
I certainly agree. It's going to prove a tough proposition. But, I mean, our away record, as we've discussed on this podcast, is there for everybody to see. I think it's only 4 defeats in our last 27, 28 away games. So it's definitely a record to be proud of. Coming to you next, Ian, what do you make of it? It's going to be a tough game up there. I mean, they've got some attacking threats. Do you still feel our firepower will be enough to overcome them?
I think that a lot depends on the fitness of Eric Lamela. If he's coming close to getting back to form and he gets back on the pitch, then and we can get our first string 11 out, then I could see us just nicking it down at St Mary's. So, but I'm with Jason. I think that we need to go down there and we need to get something positive out of the game.
And coming to you, Lyle, I know we've discussed a lot on this podcast about transfer policy and structure. A club like Southampton, from an outsider's perspective like yourself, what do you make of it? Because they seem to have done really well down there in terms of their player recruitment. I mean, fair enough, they do seem to lose, obviously, their big players. But in terms of the recruitment policy they've got there, what do you make of them as a football club?
Yeah, they're a good club, aren't they? They're doing things the right way, and they've invested a lot in the recruitment side, and they've got some good guys working there. They've got a good track record of bringing in good players. But I think they're in a similar position to Spurs in terms of having a few players there that are going to need a few years, a year or two of development, and they've got a new manager, obviously, so they're still adjusting to the way he wants to do things. And I think they're kind of edging into a patch of good form themselves. I mean, they look good away at Bournemouth, and so I think it's going to be a really, really tough game and a really fascinating game, really, against two teams that like to play in a similar way, and plenty of pressing, and Southampton like to take the ball and have a lot of the ball and build up quite carefully. So it will depend on what Poch does tactically. I think it might be a good idea, and I wouldn't be surprised if he did play a slightly different formation and look to play a bit more on the counter attack. I mean, I remember this time last year they did that away at Watford when we played 3 at the back and we played on the break and won the game, and it was a really, really exciting game. And I think we spoke earlier, didn't we? I said something earlier about Chelsea when they went down there, and they're the only team to have won down there this year. Obviously playing there 3-4-3, and they very much did that. They sat back and let Southampton have a lot of the ball, luring them into a bit of a false sense of security, really, and trusted themselves defensively to not let them through. And then when they got the chance to hit them on the break, they did, and they did it a couple of times to pretty devastating effect. But I mean, yeah, I agree with what you guys said about Lamela, not being in the team. I think if you want to play on the break, Lamela's great for that. So, on the counter side is whether Pochettino's got the players to play on the break, and also with a lot of games coming up and in this period, he might rotate it a little bit. If he wants to play on the break, he might bring somebody like Nkudu in and give him a start or something like that. You never know. Play Winks in that that deeper role in midfield and look to use his passing ability. You know, someone that can initiate counter attacks and play that killer ball. He could do that. It'll be a fascinating game, but a tough one for Spurs, definitely, and a real test to see how far they've improved since they got over that poor Spurs form.
Yeah, and just touching upon Lala, you mentioned about Eric Lamela. I know you follow Spurs very closely in terms of the injury news. What is the news in terms of Toby Alderweireld and Eric Lamela? Have you got any information for the fans ahead of the game? Do you think there's a likelihood that both may pull through to make it?
I'm not sure, actually. I mean, there's been no update since the weekend. I mean, I have tried and been told that there isn't actually anything to be updated on. So I think they're both obviously doubtful for the game. And we'll see. I mean, Toby's problem, obviously, the previous problem he had was a nerve problem in his knee, quite a rare nerve problem. And I'm only speculating here in that the problem he's got now is with his back, and I'm only speculating when I say that your knees are connected to your back in terms of your nervous system. So I wouldn't want it to be. I hope it's not anything to do with that or a recurrence of that. And I mean, Pochettino did say it was a minor thing and he shouldn't be out. So. It's probably likely that he'll be available. It'll depend on what Pochettino says in his press conference, obviously before the game. So that'll be in a few days' time.
Yeah, I mean, what do you make of it? Because a lot of fans now are seeming to put Mauricio Pochettino's timescale similar to that of Arsene Wenger down the road on Eric Lamela. It does seem to be a bit of a concern with his injury. Have you got any kind of news? I mean, is it still, as we understand, to be a hip injury? That's what, as fans, we seem to understand that's what the issue is.
But he's had personal things to deal with in Argentina as well, which are not injury related. The last info we had was that he was on the way back. He was on the grass and he was running around. So as long as he hasn't had any recurrences of that or reactions to it, you would have thought or expected him to be available in the next couple of weeks, but again, I wouldn't want to put time frame on myself. I'm not privy to that particular information at this point in time. So we'll see. I guess. I think if I was going to put my house on it, I'd say that I think the Southampton game might come a bit too soon for him.
Interesting. It's always interesting. Let's go around the table and get some predictions. Starting with you, Jace. What are you going to go for?
I'll go for us to nick the game down there 1-0.
Okay.
I think, the one thing I'd like us to see a little bit do down there is to get Kane just a little bit more involved. I mean, we talked about Ali earlier, and I said he still looks a goal threat when he's poor, but Harry, the last couple of games, has been definitely below par, and he hasn't looked any goal threat. So I'd just like to see us create one or two things for Harry and get him playing in the areas and get him shooting from inside the penalty area rather than constantly pulling out wide and starting to drop a little bit deep through frustration, perhaps not getting chances for himself.
Okay, no, I think we can agree on that. I think Harry Kane at the moment, whilst he's not scoring, people may argue he's contributing to play. Didn't have a great game at the weekend, but again, there'll be that clamour if you was to leave him out, then there'll be that clamour to bring him in. But I think at the moment we haven't really got that option of Janssen still being injured. Coming to you, Ian, what do you think in terms of a prediction down there?
Well, I was going to go 1-0, like Jason. So I'm going to pick another score just to make it interesting, and I'll say I think we might just shade it 2-1, but it's going to be tight. I'm angling towards a draw, but if I've got to be positive, and I normally am, 2-1 Spurs.
Yeah, I think I'm going to share your insight, Ian. Again, I think it's going to be a very, very tough game down there. And like Lara was rightly mentioned, they've only lost the one game this season so far at St Mary's, obviously against Chelsea, so it's going to be a tough one. I'm also going to edge it and say 2-1. Lyle, can we call upon your assistance from an outside perspective? If you had to have a gamble, what would you think?
Oof, if I was going to have a gamble, my head says it will be a draw. I think I would go with a 1-1 for this one, just because Southampton have improved over the last few weeks at the same rate as Spurs have. So, I think it'll be just a bit too close. But you never know. I mean, Spurs have got a track record of having no fear away from home. So it's the kind of place you go and definitely not rule out Spurs win. So I'll say 1-1 just to be safe.
Yeah, well, there you go. There's a sensible head definitely on the podcast this week. I've got to say, I think Spurs' record away from home, and just in the Christmas period, we do seem to have a good record. So there's no reason to fear going up there. Guys, that is all we've got time for on this Christmas edition of the e-Spurs podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure. Ian, thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome, and Merry Christmas. It's a prosperous one for everyone that listens in and the guys on the pod.
Likewise. And Jace, again, same to you. Thanks so much for your contribution this year.
No problem, mate. And as Ian said, let's hope everyone has a good Christmas and plenty of reasons to be cheerful. Hopefully at Southampton and Watford, and definitely leading us that Chelsea game. What a great start to 2017. 3 points in that one will be.
Fingers crossed. And Lyle, I can't thank you enough tonight. Thank you so much for coming to join us tonight on the e-Spurs podcast.
No problem. No, I really enjoyed it, and it's always good to chat about all Spurs. And yeah, I mean, if you ever want me on again, then give me a shout. I'll be more than happy to. And yeah, echo the guy's sentiments. And Merry Christmas to all of you, and don't drink too much.
There you go. There's wise words, and I'm sure we'll be calling upon your assistance. Hopefully after the January window, once we've signed Ronaldo and Messi, and you can tell us how we managed to negotiate those deals, of course.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, great. Well, guys, all that remains to be said is have a very, very Merry Christmas, and we will be back after the Southampton game when, fingers crossed, it will be 3 more points on the ball. And all that remains to be said now is, come on, you Spurs!
Last year, Tottenham.